The old telephone set gave an unexpected trill that made me wince. I looked up from the crossword puzzle in the morning paper and glanced at the clock. It was early 11. I rarely waited for a call, and at this hour I didn't expect one. "Bramble here," I said, picking up the phone and trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, it's Harlan." My son's voice sounded unusually cheerful. I tensed involuntarily. In recent years, our conversations had been reduced to brief congratulations on holidays and formal questions about his health. "Something happened?" I asked bluntly. The time for small talk was long past. "Sir, actually, it's good news," he said with a touch of pride in his voice. "I've been promoted. I'm now head of the financial audit department." "Congratulations," I said, and I was silent, waiting for him to get to the real reason for the call. "Winifred and I are having a little dinner this Friday. I'd love for you to come." I almost snickered. Winifred, his wife, is inviting me to a family dinner? The same woman who's been looking at me like a cockroach in soup every time I see her for the past 3 years? "Are you sure your wife is aware of this invitation?" I asked, not hiding my skepticism. "Dad," he said, a pleading tone in his voice, "I really want you to be there. It's important to me." Strangely, those simple words made something shake inside. When was the last time my boy said I was important to him? Was it 15 years ago? Or 20? "Okay," I agreed after a pause. "Friday. What time?" "6 p.m. I could hear the relief in his voice. "Thanks, Dad." I hung up the phone and looked thoughtfully at the picture of Cordelia on the mantelpiece. It had been taken a year before she died, when her illness had not yet completely drained her. My wife was smiling warmly and a little sadly, as if she knew even then that she would leave us. "What do you think, Delia?" I asked the portrait. "Is it worth going?" Talking to pictures was one of the many strange skills one acquired after living alone for 5 years. But today, Cordelia didn't answer. She was always silent when the conversation was about Winifred. I remembered their only meeting at Cordelia's funeral. Harlan and Winifred had only been married a couple months. Winifred had been impeccable, supportive of Harlan, attentive to every detail of the funeral, even taking the time to comfort me, a man she was seeing for the second time in her life. But there was something in her eyes. Wrong. Cordelia would call it a lack of soul. "She's like an actress playing the part of the perfect daughter-in-law," I told Tabitha after the funeral. "Maybe you're just being too hard on her," my old friend replied. But I couldn't escape the impression of falseness. The first crack in our fragile neutrality came at Christmas when Harlan and his wife came to visit. Winifred brought homemade apple pie, kissed me on both cheeks, and called me Daddy. I could barely contain a shudder. After the holiday meal, when Harlan went out to get wood for the fireplace, she suddenly changed. Her gaze became cold, her voice businesslike. "Harlan and I are thinking of moving to a larger house," she said. "We might need your help with the down payment." I looked at her in surprise. My late wife had left Harlan enough money for such a down payment. Did Cordelia's money? "We invested it in securities," she said, and for a split second there was something like defiance in her eyes. In that moment I realized that my son had no idea what this investment was. My intuition, honed over 32 years as a bailiff, rarely failed me. From then on, our relationship took the form of a Cold War. Winifred no longer asked me directly for money, but each time she managed to insert phrases about how hard their lives were and how hard Harlan worked. I pretended not to take the hint. She began to turn Harlan against me, discreetly at first, then more and more openly. Our meetings became less and less frequent and colder. The last time we saw each other was on Harlan's birthday, about 6 months ago. Winifred had been whispering all evening with some friend of hers, and when I happened to be passing by, I heard a fragment of a phrase, "Old man's marasmus." "Harlan says it's getting quite unbearable." Noticing what I'd heard, she gave me a luscious smile. "I didn't tell Harlan. Why should I? He would only have gotten mad at me for bad-mouthing his wife. My son has long looked at the world through her eyes, or rather, through the rose-colored glasses she put on him." As we were getting ready to go out for a walk, I wondered why now she had decided to invite me to dinner. What had changed? I remembered what Cordelia had said about that kind of character shortly before she died. Women like that prepare the ground long before they strike. Like spiders, weave a web, and then wait. What was Winifred up to? Martinsburg was a town small enough for a retiree to walk to any part of it, but big enough to hide from the neighborhood eyes. Tabitha lived 4 blocks away from me, in a neat house with a bright blue door. She and her husband had once lived in this house. Now she lived here alone. We had met her and her late husband, Alfred, back in the 80s, when I was just starting out as a bailiff and she as a private investigator. Sometimes we joined forces if cases crossed paths. Over time, the professional relationship evolved into a family friendship. After Cordelia and Alfred died, he passed away 2 years before my wife, Tabitha and I supported each other. Not romantically. We were too old for new endeavors of that sort, and the memory of our spouses was still too fresh. More like two survivors of a shipwreck. Tabitha opened the door without waiting for the bell to ring. She always somehow sensed when I approached her house. "You look puzzled," she said instead of greeting me, letting me into the house, which smelled of fresh baked goods and coffee. "Harlan invited me to dinner," I said, walking into the kitchen and sinking into the familiar chair by the window. "He and Winifred are having a celebration of sorts. He's been promoted at work." "What's so puzzling about that?" Tabitha set a cup of coffee and a plate of still warm blueberry pie in front of me. "The son invited his father over to celebrate his success. Sounds normal. If it weren't for one, but," I paused to sip my coffee. The invitation clearly comes from Harlan, but he said Winifred and I are hosting a dinner party. I don't believe she would voluntarily invite me into her home. Tabitha tapped her spoon thoughtfully on the rim of her cup, a habit left over from her detective days. "Maybe she's setting some kind of trap," she said at last. "My thoughts. The question is, what kind?" "That's for you to know. What does she want from you?" I shrugged. The same thing she always does, I suppose. Money. But my finances aren't exactly a secret. She probably knows that I spent most of my savings on Cordelia's treatment. "What if," Tabitha leaned toward me, "it's not about money? What if she wants to get rid of you?" "Don't be dramatic," I grinned involuntarily. "I don't think Winifred is planning to poison me. I'm not talking about physical elimination." Tabitha shook her head. "I think she wants to cut you out of Harlan's life for good. Create a situation where you won't want to be in contact with them." It sounded plausible. Winifred had hinted to Harlan more than once that my interference in their lives was unwelcome. She said I was undermining their family and criticizing her decisions. "If you're right, Gordon," Tabitha continued, "and she's up to something, then maybe you'd better not go to that dinner. And give her a chance to tell Harlan that his father is so callous that he didn't come to celebrate his promotion." I shook my head. "No, I'll go, but I'll be on my guard. Sir, you know. Tabitha leaned back in her chair. "I always thought there was something wrong with Winifred. I can't say exactly what it is, but I've got an eye for it. She's too perfect, if you know what I mean. It's like she studied how a good wife should behave, and she's playing the part carefully." I nodded, feeling a pang of bitterness. Harlan deserved better. He'd always been a sensitive boy, maybe even too sensitive for my harsh upbringing. Cordelia had often reproached me for being overly strict with my son. "It's like you're afraid to show him how much you love him," she'd say. Perhaps she was right. I didn't know how to express tenderness, having raised Harlan in the strictness I thought necessary to make him a real man. As a result, I ended up with a son who still seeks my approval, but is too afraid of me to be outspoken. And this gulf between us is the perfect breeding ground for the likes of Winifred. "Well," I said, finishing my coffee, "now that I've decided to go, I should get ready. What do you wear to a dinner where they're probably going to try to destroy you morally?" "Your best suit and self-respect," Tabitha smiled, "and be sure to tell me how it ended." Walking back home, I pondered the evening ahead. Whatever Winifred had in mind, I would be ready. After all, I'd spent 3 decades dealing with people who lied to my face. I've learned to see the falsity behind perfect facades. And if my sister-in-law thinks she can outplay the old bailiff, well, it's going to be an interesting evening. After my conversation with Tabitha, I spent the rest of the day going over all my encounters with Winifred, trying to capture that elusive sense of falsity that had haunted me from the beginning. My memory tossed me moments. Here was Winifred talking about her childhood in a small town in Vermont. The story sounded rote, like text from a tourist brochure. Here she was describing her work as an investment advisor in generalities, avoiding the specifics that always mark a professional. Here she was talking about her parents, who had supposedly died in a car accident when she was in her 20s, without the deep sadness that I'd seen in her life. The deep sadness I've seen in the eyes of people who have actually experienced such a thing. 32 years as a bailiff taught me how to recognize liars. People mired in debt often resorted to the most elaborate fabrications to avoid paying. I've seen them cry crocodile tears, telling of illnesses that didn't exist, losses that didn't happen, hardships made up as they went along. Over time, I learned to notice the little inconsistencies that gave away the lies. The repetition of the same phrases, as if learned by heart, the lack of emotional response appropriate to the story, the avoidance of details where there should be many. And in all of Winifred's stories, I saw these signs. But it's one thing to suspect and quite another to have proof. The next morning, I made my way to Tabitha's house again. She opened the door like she was just waiting for me. Darren, you've decided to dig up your sister-in-law? It wasn't a question, it was a statement. How do you know? Because you're Gordon Bramble, and you never leave a doubt unresolved. She stepped back, letting me inside. And because I'd do the same if I were you. We settled into her small office, where Tabitha still kept the equipment and materials from her investigations. An old computer hummed softly in the corner, shelves littered with case folders she'd never gotten around to filing. Too many memories. What do you know about her? Tabitha asked, pulling the notebook closer to her. Not much, I admitted. Winifred Porter, 41 years old now, born and raised in Bristol, Vermont. Parents died in a car accident about 20 years ago. She graduated from Cornell University with a degree in economics, works as an investment consultant for Axon Advisors. She met Harlan at a financial conference 5 years ago, and they married 2 years after they met. Tabitha took notes, nodding vigorously. Brothers? Sisters? Only child, she said. Childhood friends she keeps in touch with, I wondered. Never mentioned anyone in particular. Says she moved away after her parents died and lost touch with old friends. Convenient, Tabitha hummed. What about her life before she met Harlan? Was she married? Claims she wasn't. Says she was too focused on her career. What about pictures? She must have some pictures of her childhood, adolescence. I saw some at their house, I said. But it's just her. No parents, no friends. Tabitha tapped her pen on her notebook. You know what the hardest part of creating a new identity is? The photos. They're almost impossible to fake authentically. That's why people who change identities usually avoid showing pictures with other people, or claim everything was lost in a move, fire, and so on. I wasn't surprised that Tabitha went straight to the identity change theory. She'd seen a lot of crooks and con artists over the years as a private investigator. Do you think she's not who she says she is? It's just a guess at this point, Tabitha shrugged. But your description is suspicious. Too smooth a biography, too convenient explanations for the lack of ties to the past. We can start simply by checking to see if Winifred Porter of Bristol, Vermont, whose parents died in a car accident 20 years ago, existed. How do we do that? I still have access to some databases. Her eyes gleamed slyly. And a couple of old acquaintances in the right places. Give me a couple days. I nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and strange relief. Finally, my suspicions would be either confirmed or disproved. There's something else, I said. Shortly before our last meeting with Harlan, I overheard Winifred's telephone conversation. She was talking to someone named Randall and mentioned something about a past that must remain buried. When I entered the room, she abruptly changed the subject. Randall, Tabitha wrote the name down, underlining it twice. This could be a lead. I'll check it out. Thank you, Tabitha. I got up to leave. I know it's a lot to ask. Leave it, she waved her hand. You have no idea how much I miss the real work. Most of my current clients are jealous wives checking up on their husbands. No call. 3 days later, Tabitha called and asked to come in. Her voice sounded like she'd hit on an interesting trail. You were right, she said as I entered her office. Winifred Porter of Bristol, Vermont did exist, and her parents had really died in a car accident. Only not 20 years ago, but 23 years ago. And best of all, Winifred Porter herself had also died in that accident. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you sure? Absolutely. Tabitha turned the computer screen toward me, where an old newspaper article was open. Uh-huh. Tragedy on Highway 89. Porter family killed in head-on collision. The father, mother, and their 19-year-old daughter Winifred, a first-year student at Vermont College. I gazed into the blurry black and white photograph of the smiling girl. There was nothing about her that resembled my sister-in-law. So your Winifred stole the dead girl's identity, Tabitha continued. It's an old trick. You find a record of someone born around the same time as you, but who died young. You get a copy of the birth certificate and then use it to make new documents for yourself. But why? I muttered. Why did she need to change her identity? Oh, it's usually to get away from something or someone, Tabitha shrugged. From debt? From the law? From an ex-husband? Ex-husband? I remembered how confident Winifred had been about never having been married. It's just an assumption, Tabitha raised her hand. But I checked something else. Remember the Randall you mentioned? I found several Randalls who might have been connected to the financial world during the period when your sister-in-law started her career. One caught my eye. Randall Galway, a financier who committed suicide 6 years ago after his investment company collapsed. She handed me a printout of the article. The picture was of a personable man in his 50s with a penetrating gaze and a barely perceptible smile. Shortly before his suicide, the company was accused of financial fraud, Tabitha continued. Shirarinun. But the most interesting thing is that Galway had a wife who disappeared immediately after his death. Her name is Priscilla Galway, and here's a picture of her. I looked at the photo of the socialite and felt my breath catch. The woman in the picture was younger, with different hair and makeup, but it was definitely Winifred. Are you sure it's her? Not 100%, Tabitha admitted. The picture isn't the best quality, but the resemblance is obvious. And look at the dates. Priscilla Galway disappears 6 years ago, and a year later Winifred Porter meets your son. I've been trying to make sense of this information. My daughter-in-law is the widow of a financier who committed suicide after a financial scandal. A woman who changed her name and created a new identity? How deeply entangled was she in her husband's affairs? Was she an accomplice or an innocent victim? I need more information about Priscilla Galway and her husband, I said. About the scandal? About his suicide? About the money? I'm already looking into it. Tabitha nodded. But it'll take time. I have an acquaintance in the financial prosecutor's office. He promised to look for materials. In the meantime, she looked at me with concern. What are you going to do with what you already know? It was a difficult question. My suspicions were confirmed. Winifred was indeed hiding something, but was it worth telling Harlan? He adored his wife, thought she was perfect. How would he react if he knew she'd been lying to him all these years? Shokolatima, nothing yet, I decided. We need to get the whole story first. Find out why she changed her name, if she was involved in her husband's affairs. Maybe she had a good reason to make a fresh start. But even as I said those words, I didn't believe them. A woman who had shamelessly appropriated the name of a dead girl, who had lied to my son from the beginning of their relationship, hardly deserved leniency. The next week passed in tense anticipation. I tried not to think about the upcoming dinner, instead focusing on the investigation. Every day I checked in with Tabitha, and every day she shared new details about Randall and Priscilla Galway's dark history. It turned out that Galway was the head of a small but successful investment company in Boston. He married Priscilla, his secretary, a year before his business began to collapse. According to colleagues, she was an ambitious young woman who quickly settled into her role as the wife of a wealthy financier. After the collapse of the company and her husband's suicide, Priscilla disappeared, taking the rest of her savings. There were rumors that she was aware of her husband's machinations, perhaps even helped him. But here's what is interesting, said Tabitha when I once again came to her. In the case of bankruptcy of the company, Galway appears in the name of Bertram Pike, who lost several $1 million because of the machinations of Galway. Pike has vowed to find all the hidden assets, including those that Priscilla may have taken with her. And I have reason to believe he's still looking for her. This news alarmed me. If Winifred really was Priscilla, and this Pike was still looking for her, perhaps that was why she was so careful to hide her past. Was there any chance that Pike might have found her? I asked. It's hard to say, Tabitha answered thoughtfully. On the one hand, she's disguised herself well. On the other, people like Pike have resources and connections, and they don't forget a grudge. I remembered Winifred's strange behavior lately, her nervousness, Her sudden desire to invite me to dinner. What if she felt that the ring was shrinking, that her past was about to catch up with her? Gordon, Tabitha looked at me seriously. You have to decide what to do with this information. Dinner is the day after tomorrow. Will you tell Harlan the truth? I was silent, thinking over the situation. Tell my son that his wife is an imposter with a dark past? It would ruin his life, break his heart. But to keep silent, don't I put him in even more danger? What if Winifred's past catches up with her, and Harlan finds himself caught up in a story he knows nothing about? I don't know, Tabitha, I said honestly. For the first time in my life, I don't know what to do. Friday came all too quickly. The night before, Tabitha had brought me the latest finds. Printouts of newspaper articles about the collapse of the Galway company and several photographs of Priscilla at charity events and social gatherings. With each new picture, I saw her resemblance to Winifred more and more clearly, and my doubts melted away. My sister-in-law was indeed the widow of a suicidal financier, possibly an accessory to his crimes, and definitely the woman who had stolen the identity of the dead girl. Have you decided what you're going to do? Tabitha asked as I looked through the materials. Not yet, I admitted, but I'll figure something out on the way. I stood at the door of my son's house clutching a bottle of 18-year-old whiskey, a promotion present, still unsure whether to open the cards. Suspicion and evidence are different things. I had reason to believe that Winifred was Priscilla Galway, but there was no absolute certainty. And if I'm wrong? Harlan opened the door, his face lit up with a genuine smile. Papa, you've come. He hugged me with unexpected warmth. Come in. We're just opening the wine. I crossed the threshold, carefully watching Winifred, who stood at the back of the spacious living room. Her face expressed neither joy nor annoyance, only a carefully rehearsed politeness. On me. Gordon, how nice that you could come. She moved closer to kiss me on the cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and tension. Harlan was so anxious to see you. Couldn't miss such an event. I handed the bottle to my son. Congratulations on your promotion, Harlan. Thanks, Dad. He looked at the label. Wow, an 18-year-old Glenlivet. That's your favorite, I remember. I nodded. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Winifred's lips tighten slightly. Did she not like that I knew her son's taste better than she did? Or was she just unhappy with my presence? I'll show you the house, Harlan offered. We remodeled it last month. As we walked through the rooms, I noticed the little details. The house was tasteful, but without personality, as if it had come from the pages of an interior design magazine. Not a single old photograph, not a single personal item that could tell us anything about Winifred's past. I guess it's just the three of us for dinner? I asked when we got back to the living room, where the table was set for three. Yes. Harlan looked a little embarrassed. We wanted it to be a family night. Family night. It sounded as if Winifred was preparing the field for some sort of operation. Dinner began in a tense atmosphere. We discussed neutral topics, the weather, city news, Harlan's work. Winifred played the role of the perfect hostess. She served the food, poured the wine, kept the conversation going with small talk. But I could feel the wariness behind the mask. It was as if she was waiting for a trick on my part. Tell your father about your new project, darling, she suggested, as we moved on to the main course. I've been appointed to lead the audit of a large regional hotel chain. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also an opportunity to prove myself. If all goes well, I could be promoted to partner as early as next year. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Your mother would be proud of you. Yeah, it's too bad she didn't live to see it. A shadow flickered across Harlan's face. By the way, remember how she always said that I would be more successful than you? I smiled. She was right. You've already accomplished more than I did in my entire career as a bailiff. Don't be modest, Gordon, Winifred interjected with that peculiar intonation that made a compliment seem like a jab. Harlan always said that your work was difficult and important. Yes, beating debts out of poor people is a very noble occupation, I said sarcastically. Dad, you always underestimate yourself. Harlan shook his head. You were one of the most respected bailiffs in the county. I remember people coming to you for advice, even when they didn't need it. That's true. I felt a rush of warmth. Maybe I wasn't such a bad father after all, if Harlan remembered it with pride. In any case, Winifred took the lead again. Harlan is carrying on the family tradition of honesty and hard work. And it's so important to know your roots, your history. I looked at her carefully. Was it an innocent comment or a deliberate provocation? Yes, family history is very important, I said slowly. What about your family, Winifred? You don't talk about it much. Her smile became a little more strained. Tree. We've discussed it more than once, Gordon. I lost my parents a long time ago. It's still hard to talk about it. Of course, I understand, I paused. But I was trying to remember the other day. What year was that accident? 20 years ago. Pano, about that, she was clearly starting to get nervous. I wouldn't want to now. It's strange, I continued as if nothing had happened. I was reading about car accidents in Vermont, and I found mention of the Porter family in Bristol. That's your hometown, isn't it? Winifred froze, her eyes widening for a moment. Dad, why are you doing this? Harlan intervened. You know Winifred doesn't like to talk about tragedy. I'm just clarifying the details. I shrugged. The article said the whole family was killed. All three of them, the father, the mother, and the daughter. There was silence. Winifred slowly put down her fork. Perhaps you've read about another family. Her voice was steady, but the fingers clutching her napkin were white. Bristol is a small town, but not so small that there's only one family with that surname. Maybe, I agreed. It's a shame you don't have any pictures of your parents. I'd love to see them. Dad! Harlan looked shocked. What's gotten into you? It's all right, dear. Winifred put her hand on her husband's shoulder. Your father is just curious. After all, he has a right to know more about his daughter-in-law's family. Her tone was calm, but her eyes threw lightning bolts. Exactly, I nodded. Besides, it's my professional habit to check facts. You know, Harlan, how much I've dealt with people hiding their pasts, changing their names. What are you getting at? Harlan asked sharply. I looked directly at Winifred. I'm just thinking out loud. For example, what would you think if you found out that your wife is not really Winifred Porter from Vermont? That the real Winifred Porter died with her parents 23 years ago? Harlan looked from me to his wife in bewilderment. Daddy, have you had too much whiskey? Or is this some kind of stupid joke? No, it's not a joke. I kept my gaze on Winifred. And I'm just wondering how you'd feel if you found out that the woman you married was really Priscilla Galway, widow of a Boston financier who went bankrupt and killed himself 6 years ago. Winifred's face turned white as chalk. For a moment, I thought she was going to faint, but instead she rose abruptly, knocking over her wineglass. How dare you? Her voice shook with rage. You come into my house and make such absurd accusations. Wah! When he calmed down, Harlan tried to take her hand, but she yanked it away. No, I will not stand for this. She turned to me, eyes burning with rage. Get out of my house. Immediately. Harlan jumped up, clearly confused and frightened. Winifred, please, let's just... I said, get out! She practically screamed. Your father has always hated me, always trying to ruin our marriage, and now he's come up with this ridiculous lie. I slowly got up from the table, keeping my composure. A lie? I said quietly. Then perhaps you can explain why Priscilla Galway looks exactly like you in this photograph from a fundraiser in Boston 6 years ago? I pulled the photograph Tabitha had brought me from my inside jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Harlan grabbed the picture, staring at it incredulously. The photo was of Winifred with a different hairstyle, in an elaborate evening gown, holding the hand of a gray-haired man. The caption read, Randall and Priscilla Galway at the Bright Futures Foundation fundraiser. Winifred stared at the photograph like a rabbit at a boa constrictor. It's a fake, her voice sounded uncertain. Oh dear, it's not fake. I shook my head. Neither is the other evidence I have. The bankruptcy papers of your husband's company, articles about his suicide, witness testimony about how you disappeared right after his death, taking the rest of the money. And especially interesting is the testimony of Bertram Pike, who lost several million because of Randall's machinations, and who, by the way, is still looking for you. I turned to my son, who stood pale and shaken. Harlan, your wife is not who she says she is. She stole the dead girl's identity to hide from the consequences of her first husband's financial shenanigans. She may have been in on it herself. And I wouldn't be surprised if the money she supposedly invested, including your mother's inheritance, actually went to pay off the people who were looking for her. Harlan's face contorted with pain and disbelief. Winnie, tell me it isn't true. Winifred stared at him, her lips trembling, but not saying a word. Say something. Harlan's voice was desperate. Yeah, I can explain, she finally said in a weak voice. So it's true? Harlan exhaled. Winifred sank slowly into the chair as if her legs refused to hold her up. I didn't want you to find out. Like this. Not from him. She gave me a hateful look. Son, oh my God. Harlan sank into the chair across from her, not looking in her direction. All this time, you've been lying to me about your whole life. I had to. There were tears in her voice. You don't realize what I've been through. Randall was a monster. He dragged me into his schemes. I was young, stupid. And when it all fell apart, he killed himself and left me to deal with the consequences. And that's why you stole a dead girl's identity? Harlan's voice was icy cold. I had no choice. Pike threatened me, said he'd track me anywhere. I had to disappear, become someone else. And our relationship, our marriage? Harlan finally looked at her. Was that a lie too? Winifred shook her head desperately. No, no, I swear, I have fallen in love with you. Our marriage is the only real thing I've had in all these years. Real? Harlan grinned bitterly. How can a marriage based on lies be real? I stood watching the drama unfold with mixed feelings. The truth had come out, just as I wanted it to. But looking at my grief-stricken son, I couldn't help but wonder. Was it worth it? Why now? Winifred suddenly turned to me. Why did you decide to reveal it today? That's certainty, because you were up to something, I answered. This dinner, the unexpected invitation. I knew you were planning something. Were you trying to turn Harlan against me for good? Or just setting the stage so you could disappear again when Pike got too close? She didn't answer anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. Are you really Priscilla Galway? Harlan asked quietly. Winifred nodded slowly. My real name is Priscilla Morrow. Galway is Randall's last name. We were married for 4 years. There was a heavy silence on the table. I could see tears streaming down Harlan's cheeks. My strong, reserved boy was crying for the first time since his mother's funeral. I think I'd better go, I said at last. You two need to talk alone. Harlan did not answer, did not raise his head. Winifred or Priscilla sat motionless, like a waxen figure. I headed for the exit, but at the very door of the living room I turned around. Harlan, if you need a place to stay, my door is always open. He nodded slightly, not looking in my direction. That was all I needed. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the evening air. Martinsburg slumbered peacefully under the soft light of the street lamps. No one cared that a whole life had just been destroyed in one of the houses. I felt no triumph, only fatigue, and a vague sense that I had done the right thing. Harlan deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. Whatever he chose to do next, accept Winifred with all her dark past or break off the relationship, would be his conscious choice, not the result of deception. As I headed home, I thought about how easily we mistake people for who they pretend to be, and how hard it can be to see the real face behind the mask. When I got home, the first thing I did was pour myself a whiskey. My hands were shaking a little. The adrenaline from my encounter with Winifred, or Priscilla, was still bubbling in my blood. I sank into the chair by the fireplace and sipped from the glass, savoring the burning in my throat. Nothing clears the mind like a good whiskey and exposing liars. Images of the evening. Harlan's shocked face, Winifred's white lips, the photograph on the table, the evidence of her double life. I had done what I thought was right, uncovered the deception, perhaps even saved my son from more trouble in the future. Why, then, was the feeling of victory poisoned with bitterness? Perhaps it was Harlan's eyes. The way he looked, not at the wife who had betrayed him, but at me, the destroyer of his illusions. As if I was the source of his pain, not the years of lies from the woman he loved. The clock in the living room struck midnight when I finally rose to go to bed. My body demanded rest, but my mind refused to settle down. I tossed and turned, running through the options in my head. Would Harlan forgive his wife? Would he want to know the truth? And most importantly, would he forgive me for opening his eyes in such a cruel way? Sleep came almost in the morning, heavy and restless. I dreamed of Harlan, a little boy with a broken knee, crying and crying for help. I was running toward him, but I couldn't get there, as if down an endless corridor. I woke up late with a headache and a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my age. Going down to the kitchen, I mechanically made coffee without tasting or smelling it. The day dragged on slowly. I glanced at my phone every now and then, but it was silent. No call from Harlan, not even from Tabitha, who I'd promised to tell about the results of dinner. Toward evening, I couldn't stand it any longer, so I called her myself. I briefly described the events of the previous evening, trying to stick to the facts and avoid emotion. And since then, no word, Tabitha asked after hearing my story. Absolute, I sighed. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad one. Give him time, she advised. Harlan just found out that his wife is an imposter, possibly a criminal. He needs to digest that. I knew she was right, but the anxiety lingered. What if I made an irreparable mistake? What if by exposing Winifred's deception, I'd lost my son for good? There was a knock at the door around 8 p.m., a sharp, decisive knock. I knew that knock. Harlan had always knocked like that, even as a teenager. 3 quick knocks, like he was afraid to change his mind. When I opened the door, I saw my son, gaunt, with shadows under his eyes, but outwardly calm. "Can I come in?" he asked. Of course, I stepped aside. He went into the living room but refused to sit down, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "You were right," he finally said, stopping by the fireplace and looking at Cordelia's picture. "Partly right. She really is Priscilla Galway. And she really was married to a financier who killed himself after his company collapsed." I kept quiet, giving him a chance to talk. "But she says she didn't know about her husband's machinations," Harlan continued. "That he was using her, that she was just a pawn in his game, that when he killed himself, she was left alone with his creditors who threatened her, especially this Pike guy. And she had to run away, change her identity, start a new life." "And you believe her?" I asked quietly. Harlan turned to me, a mixture of anger and confusion in his eyes. "I do not know what and who to believe," he exclaimed. "So my wife has been lying to me for 5 years about everything about her name, her family, her past. And all this time, my father hired a private detective to dig into her life." "I didn't hire Tabitha," I objected calmly. "Sorry, she's an old friend who helped me." "Who cares?" he waved his hand. "You spied on my wife instead of coming and talking to me man to man. And what would you do if I came with suspicions but no proof?" I tried to speak evenly, without giving in to his emotions. "Would you believe me? Or would you think I was just trying to smear your wife?" Harlan didn't answer, but his silence was more eloquent than words. We both knew he wouldn't believe it. "Hanwans, sit down," I suggested. "Would you like a drink?" He finally sank into the chair across from me and nodded. "Whiskey, a double." I poured us both a drink and handed my son the glass. He took a big gulp, crinkled his nose, and leaned back in his chair, covering his eyes. "Why did she choose me?" he asked after a long pause. "If she needed to hide, to be a part of someone's life, why me?" That was the question I was sure plagued him the most. Not the lie itself, but the motives. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe you seemed like a good fit for her, stable, reliable, reputable. Or maybe she really liked you." Harlan grinned bitterly. "Loved? The man she lied to every day?" "People are complicated creatures," I shrugged. "You can love and still be afraid of the truth." "She says she didn't plan on a long-term relationship." Harlan looked down at his glass, as if there might be answers there. "That she just wanted to wait for the scandal with her husband's company to die down. But then she fell in love and decided to stay, to start a real family." "And that's why you kept lying?" I asked gently. "She said she was afraid of losing me." His voice trembled. "That she didn't know how to tell the truth without ruining everything." We sat in silence, broken only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. It was starting to rain outside the window, a fine, autumnal, dreary rain. "How did Mom find out?" Harlan asked suddenly. "About what?" I didn't understand the question. "That Winifred, Priscilla, That she wasn't who she said she was? Did Mom say anything to you when she met her at the funeral? I thought about it, trying to remember. Cordelia, dying of cancer, pain-ridden but still perceptive, had said a few words about her sister-in-law. She said, "That girl wears a mask. I wish I could see her take it off." I didn't pay much attention at the time. I thought it was because of the morphine she was taking for the pain. But apparently your mother noticed something that escaped me. Harlan nodded, as if he'd gotten confirmation of something he'd long suspected. Mom always saw through people, he said quietly. Yeah, it was her gift. I smiled at the memory. She'd figured me out the first day we met, said I was hiding a good heart behind my prickly manners. And she was right. Harlan smiled weakly for the first time all evening. There was a pause, not awkward, but rather thoughtful. It was as if we were both trying to find our way through a thicket of misunderstandings and resentments that had accumulated over the years. I wasn't the best father, I said finally. Too strict, too demanding. After my mom died, I'd become more distant, more withdrawn into my shell. Maybe if there had been more trust between us, you might have been able to see that there was something wrong with Winifred. No, Harlan shook his head. Achka, don't blame yourself for that. I was blinded. She was perfect, or seemed to be. Perfect is often too good to be true, I pointed out. Harlan finished his whiskey and set the glass on the table between us. Oh, she denies that she was involved in her husband's machinations, he said. Claims she was just as much a victim as the investors who lost money. But I don't know if I can believe a word she says now. I understood his doubts. It's hard to trust someone who so fundamentally deceived you. What are you going to do? I asked, pouring him a whiskey. Harlan ran his hand over his face, suddenly looking very tired and much older than his years. I don't know. Part of me wants to file for divorce immediately, kick her out of the house, forget that those 5 years were even in my life. He paused. But the other part, God, Dad, I still love her. No matter what, I love a woman who probably married me just to use me. There was such despair in his voice, it made my heart sink. My boy was suffering, and there was nothing I could do to help him except be there for him. Sardanom, you don't have to make a decision right now, I said softly. Give yourself time. Think about it. Maybe you should talk to a professional, a psychologist or a family counselor. Her version of events. Harlan didn't seem to hear me, immersed in his own thoughts. She sounded so convincing. That Randall was a monster who controlled her every move, that he threatened her if she went to the police, that she was young and scared when she ran away and stole someone else's identity. And at the same time, she didn't tell you the truth when you became close. I reminded him gently. She married you under a false identity. It was a conscious choice, not dictated by fear or coercion. Harlan nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Winifred, or Priscilla, had always had a knack for persuasion, for manipulating emotions. Even now, when her lies were exposed, she found ways to sow doubt. She insists you made the whole thing up, Harlan said suddenly, that you hired someone to fake the photo, that you hated her to the point where you were willing to create a whole story just to ruin our marriage. I was prepared for that. Cornered, Winifred predictably tried to turn the tables on me. And you believe that? I asked calmly. Harlan looked me in the eye for a long time before answering. No, I don't. I don't believe it. I know you, Dad. You can be tough, even ruthless, but you never lie. He stammered. I saw her face when you showed me the picture. It wasn't the anger of an innocent man. It was the horror of being exposed. I felt strangely relieved. Despite all our differences, despite the years of estrangement, my son still believed me. I have other evidence, I said. Documents, testimony. If you want, I can... Not now, he held up his hand, stopping me. I'm not ready to see more evidence that the last 5 years of my life have been based on lies. We fell silent again. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof and windows, providing a cozy sound backdrop for our unhappy thoughts. Do you remember when we went fishing with you? Harlan asked suddenly. When I was about 10 or 11. Of course, I smiled. Shabididarinon. Every summer, to Miller Lake. You always said fishing teaches patience and observation. He looked out the window, at the rain streaming down the glass. A good fisherman knows how to wait and notice what others miss. Remember? I nodded, surprised that he remembered my words spoken so long ago. I wasn't a good fisherman with Winifred, Harlan continued. I didn't notice the signs, didn't ask questions, took everything at face value. Maybe if I'd been more careful. Don't blame yourself, I interrupted him. She was a professional liar, and it's natural to believe the ones we love. You know what the worst part is? He looked at me with pain in his eyes. Even now, knowing that she lied to me, that she probably never really loved me, I miss her. The woman who may have never existed. I didn't know what to say. Love is a strange thing. It doesn't disappear just because the object of love wasn't who it said it was. Where were you staying? I asked, changing the subject. At the Martinsburg Inn, Harlan answered. I couldn't stay at home. Too many memories. You can stay here, I suggested. Your room is always ready. Thanks, Dad, but I need space. Time to think. I understood him. Sometimes it takes distance to see things clearly. What would you do if you were me? Harlan suddenly asked. I hesitated. It was a difficult question. Honestly, I don't know, I admitted. No one knows what they're going to do until they're in that situation. But whatever you decide to forgive her, to give her a second chance, or to cut all ties, it should be your decision, based on how you feel, not what someone else thinks is right. Harlan nodded, grateful for the lack of pressure from me. I have to go, he rose. Thank you for the whiskey and the conversation. You're welcome. I stood up too. You know where to find me if you need me. He turned around at the door, as if he wanted to say something, but then he just hugged me tightly for the first time in years. I felt my eyes water. Thanks for opening my eyes, Dad, he whispered, even if it hurts. When he left, I stood in the hallway for a long time, feeling the warmth of his embrace and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Winifred denied all the accusations, as I had suspected. But the seed of doubt had been sown, and Harlan, despite his love for her, no longer looked at the world with the same eyes. I returned to the living room and refilled my whiskey. Outside, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour, as if the sky were mourning my son's shattered illusions. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Cordelia, a way woman who always saw through people, even when she was on death's doorstep. You were right, Delia, I whispered, looking at her picture. She did wear a mask, and now we were finally seeing what was underneath it. After my conversation with Harlan, I spent a restless night. Sleep came intermittently, interspersed with long periods of wakefulness as I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling and going over the twists and turns of this unpleasant story in my mind. The morning came gray, dank, with a light rain pounding the eaves, a perfect reflection of my mood. I called Tabitha right after breakfast and spoke briefly about my son's visit, his doubts and Winifred's denial, accusing me of fabricating evidence. That was to be expected, Tabitha said. People who are used to lying rarely give up when first exposed. But all we have is that photograph and my suspicions, I said. Harlan is torn with doubt right now. If Winifred is convincing enough, she can win back his trust, Tabitha finished. Well, I have news for you. Last night I got some files from my contact in the financial prosecutor's office. Documents on the Randall Galway case, testimony from his colleagues and investors, including his wife's role in the company. If you're free, I could come by today. I'll be waiting, I replied, feeling a strange tension building inside, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Tabitha showed up around noon, carrying a bulky folder, protected from the rain by a plastic bag. Her usually neatly styled hair was wet and sticking to her temples, but her eyes glistened with that special sparkle I remembered from our time together. I brought the full dossier, she said, walking into the living room and pulling a folder out of a bag. And I have to say, our suspicions have been confirmed. Your sister-in-law is not just a woman who changed her name to get away from her problems. She was an active participant in her husband's scheme. Tabitha spread out the documents on the coffee table, printouts of bank statements, copies of witness statements, interview transcripts, photographs. Priscilla Galway wasn't just a financier's wife, she began, showing me the documents. She worked in her husband's company as Deputy Director of Investor Relations. In fact, she was the face of the company, meeting with potential clients, convincing them to entrust money to the fund. She handed me several photographs of Winifred in elegant business suits at various company presentations and events. Her main talent was her ability to inspire confidence, Tabitha continued. Investors recognized her sincerity, candor, and impeccable manners. Many admitted that they decided to invest after talking to her. I looked at the photos, recognizing my sister-in-law in this impeccably dressed businesswoman. The same polished movements, the same polished smile, the same look that made the other person feel special. But was she aware of her husband's machinations? I asked, still hoping that at least part of Winifred's story was true. How could he? Here's a statement from the company's chief accountant. Tabitha handed me a piece of paper. He claims that Priscilla wasn't just in the know. She was the mastermind behind the scheme. She was the one who suggested attracting new investors to pay dividends to the old ones, creating the illusion of the fund's success. A classic pyramid scheme, just in a financial package. I ran my eyes over the depositions. The accountant, one Morton Phelps, described how Priscilla controlled the cash flow, how she gave orders to falsify the accounts, how she was personally involved in attracting whales, large investors whose money allowed the pyramid to exist. And this is a copy of the note that Randall Galway left before his suicide. Tabitha pointed to the next document. Pay attention to the second paragraph. I began to read, I take full responsibility for all financial decisions of the company, but I must admit that for the past 2 years, I have been under intense pressure from my wife Priscilla, who insisted on increasingly risky operations. She convinced me that we could get out of the financial hole if we attracted enough new investors. I gave in to her confidence, her pressure. Now that everything has collapsed, I see no way out. He blamed her before he died, I muttered. He wasn't the only one. Tabitha nodded. Here's the testimony of Bertram Pike, the big investor who lost millions and vowed to find Priscilla. He claims that she personally persuaded him to increase his investment a week before the collapse, assuring him that the company was on the upswing. I read Pike's testimony carefully. He described Priscilla as an extremely persuasive and cold-blooded liar who looked him in the eye and promised high returns when the company was already effectively bankrupt. There are financial documents here as well, Tabitha continued. After Randall's death, it was discovered that about $3 million had disappeared from the company's accounts. According to the investigation, Priscilla withdrew that money in small portions during the month before the collapse and transferred it to offshore accounts. She was preparing to escape, I said thoughtfully. Exactly. And this is particularly interesting. Tabitha handed me another document. A list of affected investors. Pay attention to page 3, item 42. I found the line and felt a chill run down my spine. There was a name, Cordelia Bramble, $250,000 invested. My wife? I couldn't believe my eyes. Cordelia had invested in their fund? The date was 3 years before she died. Tabitha nodded. Maybe she wanted to secure Harlan's future. Either way, that money disappeared along with all the other assets in the foundation. I sat stunned by this revelation. Cordelia had never mentioned investing in any foundation. Perhaps she didn't want to bother me, knowing my skepticism about financial ventures. Or more likely, she hadn't realized that she had been the victim of a fraud. Her illness had caught up with her shortly after the events. Manana, do you think it's a coincidence? I asked. Or did Winifred know that my son was the son of one of her husband's victims? It's hard to say for sure, Tabitha shrugged. But if you look at the chronology, Cordelia dies, you and Harlan organize the funeral, at which Winifred, who has already changed her identity, gets to know him better. Maybe she recognized the last name and decided to see if there was a connection. Or worse, she was specifically looking for relatives of the affected investors. Why? I didn't understand the logic. To make sure she wouldn't be recognized? Or out of guilt? Or, Tabitha hesitated, or it was a kind of revenge, she said quietly. Some crooks take a strange pleasure in cheating those they've already cheated once. It's a perverse sense of power. I remembered how Winifred had always tried to control the finances in Harlan's family, how she had insisted on investing Cordelia's inheritance. What if that money had disappeared too, moved into secret accounts to join the millions that had been stolen earlier? One more important document. Tabitha handed me a sheet of paper with an official stamp. It's a wanted notice for Priscilla Galway. She's officially charged with accessory to financial fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement of investor funds. If found, she faces up to 15 years in prison. I scrutinized the document. It was dated 5 years earlier, but the statute of limitations on such crimes was 10 years. Winifred was still wanted. And here's the latest find. Tabitha pulled out a small stack of photographs. These are pictures taken by Pike's detectives about a month ago. They'd somehow gotten on Priscilla's trail. I looked through the photos anxiously. They showed Winifred leaving the supermarket, getting into her car, entering the office building where she worked. In the last picture, she was walking beside Harlan, holding his hand. "They found her," I whispered, "and they're following her." "Son, exactly," Tabitha nodded, which explains her nervousness lately and her sudden desire to turn Harlan against you. She could feel the ring tightening. We sat in silence, digesting all the information we'd gotten. Outside the window, the rain intensified, large drops drumming on the glass, as if rushing me to make a decision. "What should I do now?" I asked at last. "Show all this to Harlan?" Tabitha tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the arm of the chair. "Shuckakurm." "It's a complicated question," she said after a pause. "On the one hand, he has a right to know the truth about the woman he's married to. On the other, it would completely destroy their relationship. Are you ready to take that responsibility?" I knew what she was talking about. It's one thing to expose a change of identity, and quite another to show proof that Winifred was an active participant in a financial crime that defrauded thousands of people, including my late wife. "If I show him those documents," I said slowly, "he won't just divorce her. He'll probably go to the police. She'll be arrested, there'll be a trial, a scandal. It would ruin not only their marriage, but Harlan's reputation." Tabitha agreed. "Much good. Being a cheating husband is one thing. Being the husband of a wanted financial fraudster is quite another, especially for a man in his profession. Auditors live on the trust of their clients." I remembered the pride on my son's face as he talked about the promotion, the new project, the prospect of becoming a partner. It could all come crashing down because of the scandal with his wife. "Sure. But if I don't tell him the truth," I continued to ponder aloud, "Winifred might convince him that I exaggerated, that I was just trying to break them up. And then I'd lose my son for good. I win." "And then there's Pike and his detectives," Tabitha reminded him. "They're already on Priscilla's trail. Sooner or later, they'll take action. And if Harlan isn't ready—" She didn't finish, but I understood what she meant. If Harlan remained unaware, he might be drawn into a dangerous game when Winifred's past caught up with her. "I need to think about it," I said, gathering the documents back into the folder. "This is too big a decision to make in haste." Tabitha nodded understandingly. "Of course, I'll leave you all the materials. Go through them carefully, weigh the pros and cons." When she left, I sat in the chair for a long time, staring at the closed folder on the table. Inside was evidence that could change my son's life forever. Was I ready to take on such a responsibility? I spent the rest of the day studying the documents, trying to find anything in them that might support Winifred's version of her non-involvement in her husband's machinations. But the deeper I delved into the materials, the clearer it became. She was not just an accomplice, but an active organizer of the scheme. I was particularly struck by the testimony of the company secretary, who described how Priscilla directed the destruction of documents in the last days before the collapse, how coldly she gave orders to falsify the accounts, how she reassured worried employees, saying that everything is under control. While her husband fell into despair, she methodically prepared escape routes. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted. Pouring myself a whiskey, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the fire and pondering the paradoxes of human nature. How could this woman, a cold-blooded fraud, play the role of my son's loving wife for years? Was there anything real about her? Did she really love Harlan, as she claimed? My thoughts returned to Cordelia, to the money she had put into the Galway Foundation. $250,000, a sum she'd been saving for years, saving for everything, denying herself small pleasures. "It's for Harlan's future," she always said. And that money was stolen by a woman who then entered our family under a false name. Was it a monstrous accident or a deliberate plan? Did Winifred purposefully seek out Harlan, knowing of his connection to one of the victims? Or had fate played a cruel trick on us all? Either way, I couldn't shake the thought that Cordelia had somehow foreseen this. Her last words about Winifred, "That girl wears a mask. I wish I could see her take it off," sounded almost prophetic now. About 10 o'clock in the evening, the telephone rang. It was Harlan. "Dad, are you awake?" His voice sounded strained. Can I come over? We need to talk." "Sure," I answered, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "I'll be waiting." He arrived 20 minutes later, drenched in rain, his eyes red from sleep. I silently led him into the living room and offered him a whiskey. He accepted the glass, drank the contents in one gulp, and sank heavily into an armchair. "I was talking to Winifred," he said at last. "A long talk. She admitted that she was indeed Priscilla Galway. Said she changed her name to escape her husband's creditors and start a new life. But she insists she wasn't involved in his machinations, that she was just as much a victim as the investors." I remained silent, letting him speak. "She says she was afraid to tell me the truth, that she thought I wouldn't understand, that I'd push her away," Harlan continued. "Nari, that she loved me sincerely, that our marriage was the only real thing she had." He stopped, looking at me with a look of desperation in his eyes. "I want to believe her, Dad," his voice trembled. "When I want to believe that at least part of our life was real. But how can I? How can I know this isn't just another lie?" I looked at my son, a grown man, a successful professional, but now so lost and vulnerable. He was waiting for an answer from me, for guidance, perhaps even permission to believe a lie that was easier than the truth. The file folder lay on the table between us. One simple gesture and Harlan's life would change forever. He would learn that the woman he loved hadn't just changed her name to run away from trouble, but was an active accomplice to a financial crime. That she probably came into his life on purpose because of her connection to his mother. That she was still a wanted fugitive, and that Pike's detectives were already on her trail. That truth would destroy not only his marriage, but his faith in people, in love, perhaps even in himself. But withholding the truth would mean I was letting him remain in the dark, putting him in potential danger when Winifred's past caught up with her. I stared at the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility. Should I shield my son from the pain of full exposure, or let him see the whole truth, no matter how brutal it might be? Harlan followed my gaze. "What's this?" he asked, nodding at the folder. I took a deep breath, making a decision that could change our relationship forever. "The documents Tabitha got from her contact in the financial prosecutor's office," I answered in a steady voice. "The case files on Randall and Priscilla Galway." Harlan stared at the folder for a long time, as if it were a poisonous snake. "Is it, everything?" he asked quietly. "Everything I could find," I nodded. "Witness statements, financial documents, photographs. What's in it?" His voice was almost a whisper. Was she really innocent? I looked into my son's eyes, seeing desperate hope in them. He wanted to hear that Winifred was innocent, that all her actions were a forced measure dictated by circumstances. But I couldn't lie to him. Not now. Not when the lie had already caused so much pain. "No, Harlan," I said softly. "According to these documents, your wife wasn't just aware of her husband's schemes. She was an active participant." I could see the last spark of hope fading in his eyes, and it broke my heart. But I went on. "This folder contains witness statements, financial documents, photographs. Everything indicates that Priscilla Galway was not an innocent victim of circumstance." Harlan remained silent, staring at the folder. His hands trembled slightly, the only sign of the storm raging inside. "I have to look at it," he said at last, holding out his hand. I hesitated for a second before handing him the folder. It was a moment of choice, a last chance to protect my son from the full truth. But at what cost? At the cost of his safety? At the cost of his ability to make informed decisions about his own life? "There's more," I said as he opened the folder. "On page 3 of the investor list, your mother's name." Harlan looked up sharply. "Mom?" "Cordelia invested $250,000 in the Galway Foundation 3 years before she died." I met his gaze. "The money she was saving for you." I saw the shock and understanding reflected on his face. "So? Winifred knew? Did she find me on purpose?" "I can't be sure," I answered honestly. "But there are too many coincidences. And there's something else. Detectives hired by one of the affected investors, Bertram Pike, discovered Winifred a month ago. They're keeping tabs on her. Harlan rubbed his face with his palms, a gesture he'd done since childhood when he was confused or upset. Show me everything, he said quietly. I need to know the truth. The whole truth. Harlan spent the next 2 hours silently studying documents, photographs, witness statements. I sat beside him, not interfering, only occasionally refilling his glass. His expression changed from shock to disbelief, from anger to deep sadness. But he didn't say a word until he had read every last line. Finally, he closed the file and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Acha, she denied it, he said after a long silence. Said she was just a public figure, that she knew nothing of the real operations, that Randall had kept her in the dark. But here, he tapped his finger on the folder. This is different. Testimony from people who worked with her, saw her give orders to forge documents, defraud investors, her own financial dealings before the collapse. His voice shook. And Mom, God, she'd defrauded Mom. And then she came into my life knowing who I was. We can't be absolutely sure she knew about the connection to your mother, I reminded him, though a coincidence seems unlikely. What difference does it make now? Harlan grinned bitterly. She'd lied to me from the first day we met. Every moment I thought was sincere, every declaration of love, every anniversary we've had, it was all built on lies. I didn't know what to say. No words could ease his pain. What are you going to do? I asked after a pause. Harlan ran his hand through his hair, took a deep breath. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to go to the police right away, to tell them everything I've learned. The other part, he paused, searching for words. Another part of me just wants to disappear. Go somewhere where no one knows me and start over. I understand, I nodded. But before you make a decision, think about what might happen if you don't do anything about it. Pike's detectives have already discovered her. Sooner or later, they'll make the next move. And then I'll be caught up in the scandal, Harlan nodded understandingly. Husband of a fugitive con artist. A perfect addition to an auditor's resume. There was a bitter irony in his voice, but I could see that the thought went deeper. He was beginning to realize the potential consequences of inaction. I have to talk to her, he finally decided. Show her these documents and hear what she has to say. If she denies everything again, lies to my face, with this evidence in front of her. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew it would be the end of their relationship. Would you like to spend the night here? I suggested it. It's late, and tomorrow will be a hard day. Harlan shook his head. No, I'll go to a hotel. I need to be alone to think. He stood up, picking up the file folder. Thank you, Dad, he said quietly. For the truth, no matter how bitter it was. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When the door closed behind him, I remained seated in the chair, staring at the fire in the fireplace and pondering the consequences of my choice. I had given my son the truth, but what price would he have to pay for that knowledge? The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. I called Harlan several times, but only got to voicemail. Tabitha advised me not to worry. He needed time to figure things out, to make a decision. But the anxiety wouldn't let go of me. What if he decided to forgive Winifred? What if she had managed to manipulate him again, making him believe his innocence against all the evidence? On the third day, when I was ready to go to the hotel and look for my son, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw Harlan, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, but with a determined expression on his face. May I come in? He asked. I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. He went into the living room, sank into the same chair where he had sat 3 days before, and looked at me with a long stare. I talked to her, he said at last. Showed her the documents, the pictures, everything. I sat across from him, waiting for him to continue. At first she kept denying it, saying it was fake, that you'd found someone who'd fabricated it all. Harlan grinned without a trace of mirth. She snapped. He fell silent, immersed in his memories. Shakun, she cried, screamed, begged me to understand, said she loved me, that it was the only real moment of her life, that she never wanted to hurt me. And you? I asked quietly. I listened. I listened for a long time. Harlan ran his hand over his face. And then I asked if she knew about Mom, that Cordelia Bramble was among the investors who'd been defrauded. His eyes darkened. She didn't answer right away. And then she said she was. That she recognized my last name at the funeral and checked it out. That it was just a coincidence at first, but then she saw it as an opportunity for redemption. Redemption? I didn't hide my skepticism. Her version of events, Harlan shrugged. She claims she wanted to take care of the son of the woman she'd indirectly deceived, that she'd fallen in love with me for real, and that she'd tried to be a good wife all these years to somehow make up for what she'd done. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Winifred had always been a master manipulator. Even now, cornered, she found a way to present her actions in the most favorable light. I didn't believe her, Harlan continued after a pause. I couldn't. Too many lies, too many coincidences. And then, those pictures of Pike's detectives. She knew they'd found her, planned to disappear again, leave me to deal with the fallout. Did she admit it? Not directly. But when I asked her why she suddenly wanted to have that dinner, invite you, she said she wanted to solve the problem once and for all. That you'd always been a threat, always suspicious of her, and that as long as you were around me, she'd never be safe. A chill ran down my spine. What exactly was Winifred planning at that dinner? To finally turn Harlan against me? Or something more drastic? I remembered the strange flavor in the wine she'd served. At the time, I'd blamed it on the variety. But now, ugh, I've filed for divorce. Harlan's voice brought me out of my reverie. I called the police. That statement took me by surprise. Did you inform the authorities of her real identity? Harlan nodded. I told them everything. About who she really was, about the documents you found. The detective I talked to said they've been looking for Priscilla Galway for a long time. There's a federal financial fraud case against her. And now what? Section Arm. They took her into custody last night, Harlan said calmly, but I could see how hard he was working. There's gonna be a trial. A trial. I'll be a witness. He looked up at me tiredly. My reputation will suffer, of course. It's hard to trust an auditor who couldn't recognize his own wife as a financial fraud. There was bitter irony in his words, but no despair. He accepted the situation and was ready to move on. You did the right thing, I said. A lot of people in your position would have chosen to close their eyes, to let her disappear again. And let her fool someone else. Harlan shook his head. No, enough lies, enough suffering. We sat in silence and staring at the fire in the fireplace. The rain drizzled outside the window, a quiet, almost soothing sound in our silence. I'm going to sell the house, Harlan finally said. Too many memories. And maybe I'll leave Martinsburg. Start over somewhere where no one knows me. Are you sure about that? I tried to keep my voice neutral, even though the thought of my son going far away hurt. Your job, your friends. What friends? Harlan grinned bitterly. In 5 years of marriage with Winifred, I lost almost all of them. She gradually distanced me from everyone I cared about, said they were a bad influence on me, that they didn't understand our high relationship. And I let it happen. I recognize this tactic, isolating the victim from loved ones, creating dependency. It's a classic manipulative technique. You can always start over here, I said. Reconnect with your friends, get your life back. Harlan thought for a moment. Maybe. But first I need time to sort things out, figure out how to move forward. Maybe take a vacation, go away for a while. You could always stay here, I suggested. Your room. Thank you, Dad, he smiled weakly. But I'll be at the hotel for now. I need space, time to be alone. I understood him. After such a betrayal, it's hard to trust anyone, even those closest to you. You know what the strangest thing is? Harlan suddenly asked me. I still miss her, the woman who never existed. His confession touched me. Despite all the revelations, despite all the pain Winifred had caused him, he still remembered the good times, still mourned the loss of what he thought was real. It will pass, I said softly. Honor in time. I hope so, Harlan sighed. You know what else is weird? I understand why you've always been so suspicious, so critical of people. All those years of dealing with debtors, crooks, You've seen the worst in people and learned to recognize lies. And I thought you were just cynical. There was no reproach in his words, only sad understanding. We were both products of our experiences. I became suspicious because I worked with deceivers. He became gullible because he wanted to believe the best in people. I'm proud of you, I said suddenly, surprising even myself. The way you've handled all this, for finding the strength to face the truth and do the right thing, even when it hurts. Harlan looked up at me in surprise. Really? Yes, I nodded. I've always been proud of you. I didn't know how to show it. I didn't know how to talk about my feelings. Your mother always reproached me for that. She was right, Harlan smiled weakly. You were both right, in your own way. He was silent for a moment, then added, thank you for revealing the truth about Winifred. I know it wasn't an easy decision. You risked losing me forever. You're my son, I said simply. I couldn't let you live a lie, couldn't leave you in danger. There was a new understanding between us, a new bond, not based on blind respect or fear, but on honesty and mutual recognition of our strengths and weaknesses. We were two men who had been through pain and betrayal and emerged from the ordeal with a new vision of the world and of each other. I think I'll be going now. Harlan stood up. I'm tired as hell. I haven't slept in 3 days. I understand. I got up too. Call me if you need anything. Anytime. He turned around at the door. Dad, thank you for everything. When he left, I went back into the living room and sat by the fireplace, looking at Cordelia's picture. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction that the truth had prevailed, pride in my son for finding the strength to do the right thing, but also sadness at the realization of all the pain he'd been through. Kerr, you would be proud of him, Delia, I said to the portrait. He's stronger than we thought. Winifred has been exposed. Her machinations stopped. I have achieved what I wanted all along, protected my son from a woman who lied to him, who may never have truly loved him. But this victory did not bring me the satisfaction I expected. Instead of triumph, I felt a quiet sadness for all the years Harlan and I had lost because of misunderstanding and mistrust, for the pain he'd had to go through to see the truth. But in that sadness, there was also hope. Hope that now that Winifred wasn't standing between us with her manipulations, now that we'd both been through the ordeal and come out of it wiser, we could rebuild our relationship. Not the perfect relationship from sentimental movies, but a real, honest relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. And maybe in time, Harlan can heal from the wounds inflicted by Winifred's betrayal. Maybe he'll learn to trust again, find the strength to open up to someone again. And I will be there for him, supporting him, but not interfering, giving advice, but not imposing solutions. That's what a relationship between a father and an adult son should be. A partnership of equals, not a hierarchy. The rain outside the window had finally stopped. The first stars peeked through the breaks in the clouds, timid, uncertain, but real. So was the hope of a new beginning that had started in my heart.